The moment my father stepped up to the podium, I already had that feeling in my gut. You know the kind, a slow, twisting knot that tells you something's about to go wrong. The ballroom was packed. Former colleagues, friends from his golf club, retired officers, all there to honor Captain Ronald. That's what everyone called him. Even me, though I never said it with pride. He tapped the mic twice. Is this thing on? All right, let's get this show started. The room chuckled. I sat at a round table near the back, next to the coat rack and an enormous decorative fern, quietly sipping my water. My brother Jake was front and center, flanked by his gorgeous wife and 3 perfect kids, smiling like he belonged in a magazine ad for America's ideal family. He did. And I didn't. Then Dad said it. I want to start by thanking both my sons, he began, glancing briefly in my direction. Jake, of course, followed in my footsteps. Athletic, focused, a real team player. And then there's my younger boy. Pause. Chuckles. Oh no. Ah, my little Picasso, he grinned. You know, when he was a kid, he used to draw everything. Walls, shoes, even our dog's face once. We thought he'd grow out of it, but nope. Now he designs cartoons for, I don't know, I think it's for phones? Laughter. I sat perfectly still, my jaw clenched so tight I could hear the blood in my ears. He wasn't done. Yeah, one time I told him, son, nobody ever got rich doodling in the margins of life. But what can you do, right? You raise them, feed them, and then they end up doing whatever that is. He waved his hand like he was swatting a fly. More laughter. That was the moment I stopped hearing individual voices. The room blurred. It felt like I was watching through a pane of glass, detached from everything. All I could think was, they're laughing at me. Again. But here's the thing. I didn't leave. I didn't cry. I didn't even stand up. I just looked down at the envelope tucked inside my jacket pocket, the one I'd sealed that morning. It had the label, Media File, Play After Speech. No one in that room knew what was coming. Not even my brother, not even my mom, who always told me, just don't make waves. But I wasn't here tonight to make waves. I was here to tell the truth. The whole story. And yes, part of me, a small, quiet part, wanted to see his face when it played. 'Cause this wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about being seen, finally, for who I really was. For what I'd built while he was too busy clapping for Jake at football games or giving speeches about real success. Let me take you back. Growing up, I was the invisible child in a very loud house. My dad was a decorated officer, my brother was the all-American golden boy, and me? I was the kid who stayed up past midnight sketching superheroes on napkins, who once made a flipbook in biology class and got detention for disruption. Art isn't a career, son, Dad would say. It's a hobby, like fishing or bowling. Real men build things, lead people, fix problems. I wanted to scream, I am building something, just not with wrenches or spreadsheets. I built characters, worlds, ideas. I made people feel. But to him, feelings were a nuisance. And yet, I never stopped drawing, even when he cut my comic art elective from my college budget. Even when he skipped my animation showcase, but flew across the country for Jake's corporate award dinner. Even when I won a small design contest in junior year, and he said, "Good for you, sport. Maybe one day you'll design t-shirts for Walmart." You learn to file that stuff away, like little emotional paper cuts. Until one day the paper becomes sharp enough to fight back. So yeah, he made me the punchline tonight. But I brought my own kind of punch. And when the video plays, well, let's just say he's not the only one who'll get a round of applause. Stay with me. It gets good. Because I learned something powerful the hard way. They can only ignore you until you stop asking for permission to be seen. You know that feeling when you realize you were never the one? Not the favorite, not the pride, not even the accidental spotlight when everyone else steps aside. Just background. That was me, always. Jake was born 3 years before me, and I don't blame him for being perfect. He just was. I mean, the guy came out of the womb with biceps. He threw his first football before he could read, broke high school records by sophomore year, and got scouted by 2 Ivy League schools, and 1 military academy, just like Dad. Of course he chose the military route. It's tradition, they said. He's a real man, they added. And me? I once won 2nd place in a 3rd grade art contest with a drawing of a flying elephant. The prize was a set of crayons and a handshake. Dad didn't even show up. Your brother just has that spark, Mom once said gently, patting my head like I was a puppy. But you're sensitive. That's good too. Just different. Different. What a lonely little word. I wasn't jealous of Jake, not really. He was genuinely nice, the kind of guy who made everyone feel like they mattered. But that made it worse, honestly. If he had been a jerk, maybe I'd feel justified in resenting him. Instead, I just felt small in his shadow. I remember one Thanksgiving, I was 17. I had just spent 2 months animating a short film for an online youth showcase. It was clumsy, sure. Some scenes skipped, some voices didn't sync. But it was mine. I poured myself into it. I came downstairs, USB in hand, and said, "Hey, Dad, I finished something. Want to watch it real quick?" He didn't even look up from the game. "Is it going to take long? Kickoff's in 10. I nodded, slowly backed away, and watched the game with them. All while my film played in silence on my laptop upstairs. I watched it too, alone. No applause, no feedback, just the quiet hum of a computer and the soundtrack I composed myself. That was the moment I knew something for certain. In my house, talent only mattered if it wore cleats or a uniform. So I stopped trying to impress them. Instead, I started building my own world. I worked after school designing characters. I learned Adobe tools from YouTube, not teachers. My nights were filled with glowing screens and quiet triumphs. Likes on DeviantArt, small freelance gigs on Fiverr. I even ghost designed a logo that ended up on the packaging of an energy drink in Norway. No one knew. No one cared. But somewhere along the way, I started to care less about their recognition. I started caring more about mine. Still, every now and then I wondered, would it ever be enough? Would anything I did, anything at all, ever make Dad say, "I'm proud of you, son," without following it up with, "But Jake scored a 3.8 GPA while captaining the rugby team"? Spoiler alert, that didn't happen. Not even when I got accepted into one of the top animation programs in the country. He blinked, nodded, and said, "You'll probably want to live with roommates. That artsy stuff doesn't pay well." I swallowed my pride and took 2 part-time jobs just to afford that dorm room. There was a professor in college, Dr. Elman, who changed everything for me. She saw something in my work, something no one else ever had. She said, "Your style has truth in it. It's not just beautiful, it's brave." I cried that night, not from her praise, but because I realized how starved I'd been for it. Dr. Elman gave me my first real break. She submitted my final project to an international design competition without telling me. A few weeks later, I got an email that read, "Congratulations. You've been selected." It wasn't just a win. It was the beginning of a future that had nothing to do with family expectations or sibling comparisons. So yeah, Dad never saw it coming. He never thought the quiet one would have something to say. But I had been speaking for years, just not in words he understood. Until now. There I was, 7 years old, missing a front tooth, holding up a crooked drawing of a lion riding a skateboard. The audience chuckled politely. Dad turned to the screen, pointer in hand, and said, "This is when we knew he wasn't going to be a quarterback." The room laughed louder this time. So did Jake. I smiled too, mechanically, because I'd learned to wear that expression like armor. I was a professional at smiling through it. But inside, I was screaming. Dad clicked to the next slide. Jake in a cadet uniform, proud and tall. "This one," he said with a gleam in his eye, "made it all worth it. 4 generations of service. I couldn't ask for more." There wasn't a slide after that. None of me graduating with honors. None of me winning the university's animation award. None of me, at all. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, wondering if the crowd noticed. Wondering if anyone else felt that strange silence that swells when someone is intentionally erased from their own family's story. But that's the thing with people like my dad. They don't erase you. That would mean they noticed you in the first place. No. They just write the story without you. And that's what this whole night was about. His story. His send-off. His big emotional bow after decades of discipline, medals, and speeches. I didn't belong in that version of the story, not as a hero. At best, I was comic relief. But here's the twist he didn't see coming. 2 weeks earlier, I got an email. A design firm in San Francisco was requesting permission to use one of my animations, the one I made in college, the one about a lonely paper bird who kept flying into glass windows, but refused to stop trying. It had gone semi-viral on a niche art blog, apparently. They wanted to use it to open their keynote at the World Creativity Summit. And they weren't just going to use it, they wanted me to attend. Me, on stage. to speak. I never told Dad, he wouldn't have cared. Or worse, he would have shrugged and said, just don't wear one of those ridiculous skinny ties. Instead, I spent the week leading up to his retirement party editing a new version of that film. Just for him. Just for tonight. It wasn't mean. I didn't roast him. I didn't mock him the way he mocked me. That would have been easy, lazy. No. What I did was far more honest, and, I hoped, impossible to ignore. I animated a simple story. It was about a father and a son. The father was a towering stone figure, stoic and proud, who could carry entire buildings on his back. The son was small, made of watercolor and movement, like he couldn't hold still, like he lived for change. At first, the father tried to teach the son to be made of stone too, to stay still, to hold weight. But every time the son tried, his colors would fade. He'd crumble a little. And in the final scene, the father looked up and saw that the son had flown, not because he followed the path carved in rock, but because he dared to become something else entirely. It had no words, just music, no names, just feeling. But when the time came to play it, I knew exactly what it would say. That I existed, that I mattered, that I saw everything and chose not to be bitter. People think revenge is about making someone pay, but sometimes it's about holding up a mirror and saying, look, this is what you missed. I handed the flash drive to the event manager an hour before the ceremony started. Labeled, for the end, one last tribute. He nodded, clueless, then asked, you sure you want this played right after his speech? I smiled, absolutely. Let him have the last word. I'll take the silence after. And that's what I did, because my story didn't need a PowerPoint. It needed a moment. And it was coming. I didn't sleep the night before the retirement party. Not because I was nervous, well, okay, maybe a little, but mostly because I was perfecting the timing on that final scene. The way the father turns just barely, his eyes widening at the watercolor figure soaring past him. It had to be subtle. Quiet, like recognition, long overdue. I had replayed that scene at least 50 times by sunrise. People always think artists are loud with their work, color, like they're screaming for attention. That's not it. For me, animation wasn't noise, it was clarity. It was everything I couldn't say out loud because I'd been taught that saying it would make me soft, dramatic, difficult. So I kept my mouth shut. Even as Dad made passive-aggressive remarks at dinners, even as relatives called Jake a real man and called me creative with that patronizing little smile. Even as I started to build something real, clients, recognition, opportunities, and no one in my family asked a single question about it. But I remembered every comment, every shrug, every time they changed the subject when I tried to talk about my passion. And that's why I poured myself into my work, because I needed someone to listen, even if it was just the screen. When I got my first paying client, I didn't tell anyone. It was a 20-second animation for a local coffee shop's Instagram story. $50. I spent 2 days on it, tweaking the shadows on the steam rising from the cartoon mug. They loved it. My dad, he never knew. To him, if it wasn't in a frame on an office wall or didn't come with a title like senior analyst, it didn't count. There were small wins after that, then bigger ones. I started freelancing for startups, designed a short for an educational nonprofit, got hired to storyboard for a music video that ended up getting 500,000 views. My name wasn't in the credits, but my style was there. The subtle colors, the character pacing, the emotional breath in stillness, that was me. And slowly I started to believe that maybe I didn't need his recognition. But that didn't mean I didn't want it. That's the tricky thing with parents. They program themselves into you. No matter how far you grow, part of you still looks back to see if they're watching. They weren't. But everyone else started to. And then came the big one. A tech conference in Tokyo reached out. Someone had shared my short about the paperbird. They wanted to license it, not just screen it, feature it. My email lit up like Christmas, requests, compliments, offers. Suddenly I had an agent, a profile on Behance that actually mattered. I stared at those messages, stunned. I hadn't changed, my style hadn't changed, my work had always been this emotional, this personal. The only thing that changed was who noticed. It wasn't my dad, it was the world, and sometimes that's enough. So when I walked into the banquet hall that night, I didn't come as the forgotten son. I came as a professional, as someone who had spent years crafting a voice that didn't need a microphone to be heard. I had tucked my hands in my pockets, I stayed quiet. I let Dad have his jokes, his PowerPoint, his moment, because I had mine waiting. All I had to do was press play and trust that what I created would speak louder than any speech he ever gave. There was a pause after his speech, one of those pauses that feels uncomfortably long, like the air doesn't know what to do with itself. People started clapping, of course. My father took a small bow, soaking it all in, like a king accepting praise at his final coronation. My brother rose to give him a congratulatory handshake. Glasses clinked. Waitstaff pushed open swinging doors to begin serving dessert. That's when the lights dimmed. At first, people thought it was an accident, a blown fuse or something. But then the screen at the back of the room flickered, and the MC's voice came on over the mic. We have a short video message prepared for Captain Ronald from someone very close to him. Please enjoy. My heart pounded. I didn't look at Dad. I didn't look at Jake. I kept my eyes on the screen. It started quietly. The first frame showed an animated figure, large, made of stone, sitting alone in a gray room. Then came the soft notes of a piano, slow and sparse, like footsteps in an empty hall. The figure carved pieces of itself into monuments, medals, trophies, flags. Each time it removed a piece, it grew a little heavier, not lighter. And then, in the corner of the screen, a tiny watercolor figure appeared, jittery, restless, constantly changing shape. It tried to speak, but the stone figure kept building, ignoring, smiling at its own reflection in the polished awards. The room was dead silent. People leaned forward in their chairs. Someone stopped mid-bite of cheesecake. A fork clinked gently to a plate. Then came the moment that broke the air. The watercolor figure drew a single image, a glowing outline of the stone man, not as a soldier or a leader, but simply as a father. It held the image up, shaking, like a child offering a gift. The stone man looked. For the first time, he really looked. And then, a crack. Right down the center of his chest. The animation faded to black and white text appeared. Some things are only visible when you choose to see. For Dad, from your other son, that was it. No applause, not at first. People just sat there, stunned, like they'd seen something they weren't supposed to, like someone had quietly peeled away the wallpaper and revealed the real room beneath. I turned to look at Dad. He wasn't smiling. His face was stone still, ironically, eyes locked on the black screen, hands folded tightly on the table. My mother blinked rapidly beside him, one hand over her mouth. Jake just stared straight ahead, his jaw slightly open. Then someone at a table near the front began clapping. Soft, unsure, but it caught. One by one, people joined in. Not wild applause, not the kind you give for jokes or ego-stroking speeches. This was different, slower, more deliberate, like appreciation, not entertainment. Dad didn't join them. He sat frozen. Then slowly, painfully, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and left the room without a word. I watched him go. I didn't follow. For once, he walked away from me. And I didn't feel small. I felt whole. That little boy with the crayon lion on a skateboard, he finally made the room stop and listen. And it didn't take yelling or revenge, just the truth, beautifully told. A few people came up to me afterward, quietly. One said, "That video? That was art." Another whispered, "I think every parent in this room is rethinking things right now." One woman grabbed my hand and said, "You made me cry, thank you." It wasn't about validation, it was about being seen. And finally, I was. I found him out by the parking lot alone, standing next to his car with the door still shut. His tie was loosened, his shoulders slightly hunched, the way they used to be after long deployments, when he'd come home not just physically tired but emotionally absent. He heard my footsteps and turned slowly. "Nice video," he said, not sarcastically, just hollow, like he wasn't quite sure what to do with the words. I stopped a few feet from him. "You left before dessert." He let out a dry chuckle. Didn't seem like I was the guest of honor anymore. I didn't smile, I didn't comfort him, I just stood there letting the quiet stretch, letting him sit in it the way I'd sat in years of silence. He shifted uncomfortably, then asked, "Was that meant to embarrass me?" I shook my head. "It wasn't about you being embarrassed, it was about me not being invisible anymore." He looked down at his hands. For once he had no speech prepared, no joke, no lesson to teach. Just a man, not a captain, not a father figure looming above me, just a man who realized he might have missed something irreversible. "I didn't know you felt that way," he finally said. I nodded slowly. "I know. That's the point. We stood there for a while, the night air cooling around us. In the distance, I could still hear the clinking of glasses, muffled conversations from inside the venue. Life moving on, without him in the spotlight. He cleared his throat. You were always different. I didn't know how to connect with that. You didn't have to understand it, I said. You just had to care. That hit him. His eyes flicked toward mine. Finally. Just for a moment. Then back down. I guess I thought if I pushed you hard enough you'd become more like me, he murmured. I did, I said. Just not in the way you expected. He looked confused. I learned to be strong in silence. I learned to carry things no one else saw. I built something out of pressure. You call that weakness. I call it art. He pressed his lips together like he wanted to say something but didn't have the right vocabulary. And maybe that was true. Maybe he'd spent so long living in a world of orders and medals that feelings just didn't fit in his uniform. Do you want me to apologize? He asked. I considered that. No, I said. I want you to see me. That's all I've ever wanted. He nodded slowly, like that was a language he was just starting to learn. We didn't hug. This wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black box. Opened it. Inside was his old military insignia, the one he used to polish every week, the one he kept in a glass case in his study. I was going to give this to Jake tonight, he said, as a kind of legacy thing. I raised an eyebrow. But? He held it out. But he doesn't need it. He already got everything he needed from me. Maybe you should have something too. I took the box. Not because I wanted it, but because I knew what it cost him to hand it over. It wasn't a medal. It was an admission. He still couldn't say the words, I'm proud of you. But I could hear them, in the silence, in the shake of his hand, in the way he finally looked me in the eye for more than a second. That was enough. I walked back inside with the box in my hand, not triumphant, not angry, just lighter, because the truth is, we spend so long trying to win approval from people who don't know how to give it. But sometimes, standing up and telling your story, fully honestly, changes things. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not forever, but enough to let you breathe. That night, I didn't just change his mind, I changed my own. I stopped needing to be the golden child. I became my own kind of light. People came up to me for the rest of the night, some curious, some moved, some just awkwardly impressed. A few said they'd never seen my father speechless before. Others wanted to know if I was the artist from the animation, and if they could follow my work online. But the moment that stuck with me the most wasn't the clapping or the compliments, or the fact that for once I was the person people were looking toward, not past. It was the drive home. I sat alone in my car, parked under a flickering street lamp, holding the little black box in my lap. His insignia. It wasn't heavy, at least not physically, but the meaning behind it? That weighed something. Years of silence, unasked questions, quiet disappointments, all pressed into that piece of metal. I opened it again, ran my thumb across the edge. It was strange. I'd always thought the day I earned my father's recognition would feel like fireworks, like all the emptiness inside me would suddenly fill with color. It didn't. It felt still. Settled, like a wound had finally stopped asking to be noticed. And maybe that was the real victory. I didn't need his applause. I didn't need him to understand every frame of my animation or to brag about me the way he bragged about Jake. What I needed, what I gave myself, was permission to stop waiting for someone else to validate my worth. My voice was always there, always loud, even when it was quiet. I just had to trust it. Since that night, things haven't become perfect. Dad hasn't transformed into a supportive, emotionally evolved man overnight. We still talk in short calls. He still mentions Jake more than he mentions me. But now when he talks about the retirement party, he always says, "Your video really got people thinking." He says it like a compliment. And for him, maybe it is. Jake texted me the next morning, just 2 words, that hit. And you know what? That was enough too. I've been working on a new project lately, one that tells a different kind of story. Not about superheroes or fantasy worlds, but about the messy, beautiful reality of being unseen and choosing to speak up anyway. It's raw, it's complicated, it's honest, it's me. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there, sitting alone in a room, wondering if their voice matters, will see it and feel a little less invisible. If that someone is you, I see you, I hear you, and I want to say, You don't need to be anyone's idea of enough, but your own. If you've ever had to sit through a room laughing at your expense, if you've ever been the quiet one in a loud family, or if you've ever created something with your whole heart and been met with silence, I hope you'll share your story too. Because our voices, they don't need permission, they just need courage. And sometimes, that courage begins with pressing play. Thanks for staying through the end. If this story touched something in you, even just a little, let's talk in the comments. Or share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know when your truth might be the mirror someone else has been afraid to look into. 6 months later, I was invited to speak at a local TEDx event. The theme was redefining legacy. I almost turned it down. I still hated microphones. Still wasn't great with rooms full of staring eyes. But something about the invitation felt full circle. Like life was gently nudging me to step forward, not as the kid who was overlooked, but as the man who now had something to say. I remember walking onto that stage, palms slick and heart loud in my chest. I didn't tell jokes. I didn't flash slides with accomplishments or testimonials. I didn't even mention my dad's name. I told a story, mine, about a kid who used to draw lions on napkins and hide them under his mattress. About a teenager who stopped talking at dinner because his words never seemed to land. About a young man who turned loneliness into animation, silence into color, and finally stood up, not with anger, but with art. When I finished, the applause didn't matter as much as the eyes. They weren't glazed over. They weren't politely detached. They were with me. Fully. Open. Listening. Afterward, a high school girl with purple hair and tears in her eyes came up to me and whispered, "My dad calls my music a waste of time, but tonight I'm gonna record anyway." And in that moment, I knew my voice didn't just free me, it made space for someone else's. A few weeks later, Dad mailed me a book. It was old, a military leadership manual from his academy days. Inside the cover, in stiff block handwriting, he'd written, "You taught me something I never learned in uniform. That strength isn't in how loud you command, but how deeply you connect." He didn't sign it, didn't need to. We still weren't hugging, still weren't the talk for hours type. But something had shifted. A quiet bridge, maybe still under construction, but real. And you know what? I'm no longer chasing a seat at his table. I've built my own, and I'm filling it with people who see, who feel, who believe that stories, even quiet ones, can shake walls, heal wounds, and rewrite what legacy really means. If you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or unloved, I promise you this: your story has power. And when you're ready to tell it, not for revenge, not for applause, but for truth, you'll find that your voice was always enough. Thanks for staying with me. Now it's your turn. What's the story you need to tell? Drop it in the comments. Even just a line. Or send it to someone who needs to know you're not alone. And if this story meant something to you, share it. Not for me. For that purple-haired girl. For the kid sketching lions in secret. For you. Because silence might feel safe, but your voice is where the light gets in.